We have more access to information than any people who came before us. A question that used to take years to answer now sits behind a few taps on a screen. We can call up the history of a war fought before our grandparents were born in less time than it takes to even open a book to the first chapter. Somewhere in that flood, an old assumption crept in. We started treating access to information as though it were the same thing as understanding it. Having an answer felt close enough to earning one. A lot of us walk around with confidence in our own judgment that the actual habits of our lives don't support. The conditions changed under us. For most of human history, information itself was hard to come by, and even once a person had it, turning it into wisdom took something even further. Applying it, testing it against real consequences, living long enough to watch how it actually played out. That process never got any faster, only the access did. The two were separate all along, and past cultures built real practices around closing that gap. That's the case this video makes. Those cultures also valued wisdom once someone had it, treating a person who possessed it as someone worth listening to, worth deferring to, in a way we don't extend to older or wiser people now. Almost all of that has disappeared from how we live, both the practices and the value placed on what they produced. What's left is a strange kind of poverty hiding inside enormous wealth. We have more information than any humans who ever lived, yet we struggle to turn it into practical wisdom and struggle just as much to recognize it in anyone who has it. Ancient Athens took the word wisdom more seriously than almost anywhere else has since. Aristotle, writing in the Nicomachean Ethics, split it into separate kinds. Episteme was the sort of knowledge that could be demonstrated and proven, the kind a mathematician has. Sophia was a higher grasp of first principles, an understanding of the highest and most permanent things. Phronesis was practical wisdom, the capacity to judge well in a particular situation, facing a particular person at a particular moment. He was blunt about what phronesis required. A young person, he wrote, can become a skilled geometrician, sharp enough to outpace his elders in pure calculation, but a young man of practical wisdom cannot be found. Practical wisdom deals in particulars, and particulars are only known through experience, and experience takes time to accumulate. A sharp mind and a stack of good books will make a person knowledgeable, but wisdom asks for years on top of that. Socrates approached the same problem from a different direction. A friend of Socrates travels to Delphi and asks whether any man is wiser than Socrates. The oracle says no. Socrates is confused by this, since he doesn't consider himself wise at all. So he sets out to test the oracle by finding someone wiser than himself. He goes to the politicians first, men with real reputations for wisdom, and he finds their confidence far outrunning their understanding. He goes to the poets next, and finds the same pattern. He goes to the craftsmen last, and here the case is more interesting, because the craftsmen actually did know things Socrates didn't. They understood their trades well, but because they were skilled in one narrow thing, they had convinced themselves they understood everything else too. Socrates describes his own position plainly. Although I do not suppose that either of us knows anything really beautiful and good, I am better off than he is, for he knows nothing and thinks that he knows. I neither know, nor think that I know. That was the whole of his advantage. He simply knew the shape of his own ignorance. Plato uses the sophists to explain the difference between appearing wise or knowledgeable and having true wisdom. The sophists were paid teachers, and what they offered was persuasion, the ability to argue any position convincingly, to win a case regardless of which side happened to be true. Plato has Socrates confront this directly in the Gorgias, drawing a hard line between what the sophists offered and what philosophy was after. The sophists dealt in doxa, opinion, shaped and aimed at an audience. Socrates was after something else, a grasp of the good that didn't bend depending on who was listening. The distinction mattered enough to Plato that he wrote whole dialogues defending it. A person could become extremely good at sounding wise while still remaining ignorant beneath it all. The distinction between accumulated knowledge and lived wisdom shows up far outside Greece, in places with no contact with Athens at all. In China, Confucius arrived at nearly the same conclusion. Confucius said it plainly: learning without thought is labor lost. Thought without learning is perilous. He drew a hard line between taking in information and actually working it over in the mind, and treated the first without the second as close to worthless. He pressed the point further with one of his students, asking whether he should teach him what knowledge really was. When you know a thing, to hold that you know it, and when you do not know a thing, to allow that you do not know it, this is knowledge. Socrates and Confucius arrived at the same place from thousands of miles away, which points to something true about how people become capable of good judgment in general. Rome took the same idea and built it directly into public life. Cicero translated the Greek concept of phronesis into Latin as prudentia, and defined it as the knowledge of what to pursue and what to avoid, a faculty built out of memory, understanding, and foresight together. Rome went a step further than definition. The cursus honorum, the sequence of offices a Roman politician had to climb, set fixed minimum ages before a man could hold real power. 30 to serve as a quaestor, 39 for a praetor, 42 before he could stand for consul. Talent alone got a young Roman nowhere in that system. The years had to be served first. Societies without writing made the same argument in a different form entirely, through who they chose to trust. The scholar Walter Ong studied this directly in his work on oral cultures. In a culture where nothing is written down, knowledge survives only if someone remembers it and repeats it. As Ong puts it, knowledge is hard to come by and precious, and society regards highly those wise old men and women who specialize in conserving it, who know and can tell the stories of the days of old. Writing changed that arrangement completely once it arrived. Ong put the shift plainly: by storing knowledge outside the mind, writing and, even more, print downgrade the figures of the wise old man and the wise old woman, repeaters of the past, in favor of younger discoverers of something new. The elder stops being where knowledge lives, the archive takes that place instead. Every wisdom tradition worth the name treated the thing as earned, never as something handed over for free. Before any of them called something wisdom, they made it pass through 3 filters: mentorship, time, and consequence. Something specific broke between their world and ours. We built habits that let information skip past all 3 of those filters at once, arriving instantly with none of them applied. The first filter was mentorship. Historically, practical wisdom passed from one person to another under direct correction. A master watching an apprentice's hands and telling him when he'd gotten it wrong. Aristotle assumed phronesis needed exactly this kind of guidance, sustained over years. Most information now arrives without anyone standing over our shoulder. Nobody corrects the take. There's also a more active version of this loss worth naming. Older generations get blamed for a long list of present-day problems, the cost of housing chief among them. Whether or not that blame is fair, one effect of it is that their accumulated experience gets discounted right along with them, and we stop bringing our hardest questions to the people who've actually lived the longest. Hannah Arendt noticed a version of this decades ago in her essay on the crisis of education, describing a break in the transmission of tradition between generations. She contrasted it with Rome, where old age was the most honored age precisely because the old stood closest to the ancestors and served as the model for how to live. It's the same downgrading of the elder as is seen when oral traditions began writing, just accelerated now by a culture that actively assigns blame instead of quietly forgetting. The second filter was time itself. Aristotle already made this point about the young geometrician. A sharp mind can master a subject fast, but phronesis only comes from years of watching decisions play out. Time does something else too. It lets one piece of knowledge sit next to another long enough to connect with it, and with whatever we've actually lived through ourselves, until the two start reinforcing each other. That's how a fact turns into something usable, tied into everything else we know well enough to hold real weight. We can read the entire history of a war in an afternoon and walk away with the confidence of someone who lived through the decisions that shaped it. The reading takes an afternoon, the connecting still takes exactly long as it always did. The third filter was consequence. In a small community, acting on bad judgment cost something immediately and visibly, and that cost corrected the next decision. Reputation was local and it was permanent. Most information now gets consumed anonymously, without any of that friction attached. Being wrong about something online rarely costs anything, and it's rarely even noticed by anyone who actually knows us. Online communities make this worse than a simple absence of correction. An echo chamber doesn't just fail to correct a wrong view, it rewards holding on to one, surrounding a person with agreement instead of consequence, until that view feels tested by a community and isn't. There's a bigger version of this same failure sitting above all three filters, built directly into the institutions that shape modern life. The philosopher Nicholas Maxwell has argued for decades that even universities made this mistake on purpose. Modern academia, in his account, organized itself around what he calls knowledge inquiry, prioritizing facts and technical expertise, and pushed questions of value and how to live well outside the boundary of serious inquiry entirely. What we actually need, according to him, is wisdom inquiry instead. Universities organize around helping people solve real problems of living, not just around producing facts for their own sake. Barry Schwartz and Kenneth Sharp found the same pattern lower down, inside medicine, law, and teaching, where rules and incentives built to prevent disaster ended up replacing the judgment those professions actually depend on. Schwartz and Sharp point to a research study of hospital custodial workers to show what that actually looks like. One of them, a janitor named Luke, was once accused of failing to clean a comatose patient's room, when he had actually cleaned it already while the patient's anxious father stepped outside for a cigarette. Luke didn't argue with them. He cleaned the room again in front of the father, so the father could watch it happen with his own eyes. Nothing in Luke's official job description mentioned patients or families at all, only mopping, trash, and restocking supplies. Most real problems Luke actually ran into on the job involved a person, and the job description hadn't prepared him for a single one of them. Schwartz and Sharp describe what people like him have as practical wisdom, using almost the same words Aristotle did. The right way to do the right thing in a particular circumstance, with a particular person at a particular time. Luke had that. He knew how to evaluate the particulars of the situation he was in and do the best thing, even if he technically did clean the room. There's one more thing I want to mention here, which was the focus of a previous video of mine. Too much information can distort a person's sense of reality entirely, drowning any real signal in the noise. Pulling in conflicting perspectives from all over the world within seconds can leave us stressed and none the wiser. That's the previous video's argument, and it holds up. This one makes a different claim, and in some ways a more unsettling one. Even information that isn't distorted at all, none of it wrong, still piles up into a feeling of understanding that substitutes for the real thing. Distortion at least announces itself. It feels like something has gone wrong. This doesn't feel like anything has gone wrong, which is what makes it the more dangerous failure of the two. We live in a world that no longer values wisdom the way past civilizations did. We can immediately access all the information we need, so who needs wisdom? We already know everything. That access carries real benefits, but devaluing wisdom carries a cost of its own. One that lands on us individually and shows up in the shape of the whole society around us. Those costs trace back to the same three wisdom filters: mentorship, time, and consequence. They were the actual mechanism, the thing that turned information into something a community was willing to call wisdom in the first place. We built a world that lets information move faster than any of them can operate, and most of us never noticed the moment that started happening. That's the individual cost and the societal one at once. A person who mistakes access for understanding, and a whole culture doing the same thing simultaneously. That's a solvable problem though. The cognitive scientist John Vervaeke has spent years studying what wisdom actually requires, and his answer is that no single habit does it alone. Wisdom, in his account, is a set of practices held together on purpose, what he calls an ecology of practices, reflection and dialogue and deliberate attention working together to catch a person's own self-deception before it hardens into belief. None of this is particularly complicated. It's just slower than everything else competing for our attention, which is exactly why it works. Ancient Athens already named everything this actually asks of us. Socrates never claimed extra knowledge over the men he questioned. His only advantage was knowing the shape of his own ignorance, and that same habit is available to anyone using the internet today. Noticing the gap between what we've read and what we actually understand, instead of closing it with false confidence. The sophists sit on the other side of that same coin as a warning. They got very good at sounding right, and sounding right was as far as it went. Chasing the appearance of being knowledgeable, instead of actually understanding and being able to put that into practice, is doing exactly what the sophists did. Aristotle's answer was patience, and it lands hardest on anyone young who feels like they should already have this figured out. He said plainly that a sharp young mind can master a subject fast, but practical wisdom doesn't work that way. It isn't available yet at 25, regardless of whatever amount of information sits behind it, no matter how sharp the mind underneath it is. Confucius adds the piece in between. Learning without thought is labor lost, thought without learning is perilous. What we're missing is the thought that turns learning into something, and without that step, simply memorizing and repeating what we've read, we are far from wise. If you enjoyed this video, you'll enjoy this video about how we know too much about the world. Also consider liking, subscribing, hitting the notification bell, and leaving a comment about your thoughts. I love reading through what you all have to say. Thanks again, until next time.